The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning once again to everyone. Welcome to Boundary Systems Wednesday webinar. My name is Michael Wimberly, and we'll be covering the Customize the Creo interface information. So we're going to go through and talk about different areas inside of Creo that can be customized, and how to go through and customize and have those things locked in. So, forgot to change that. So for the objectives of this one, we're going to go through, and once again, I apologize, I forgot to actually change that terminology. But we're actually going to go through and talk about customizing the Creo interface. The overall agenda is, of course, the introduction to myself and Boundary Systems, general topic overview, and then, of course, a presentation of the information, and then a Q&A after that. Real briefly, for myself, of course, I'm Michael Wimberly. I am a senior technical specialist here at Boundary Systems. I've been at Boundary Systems for a little bit over 6 years now, and I've been working with PTC products for over 20 years, actually over 25 years that I've been working with PTC products, but I've been training on them for about 20 years, if not a little bit more than that. I am a certified trainer in Creo as well as Windchill classes, as well as a certified implementation specialist in Windchill as well. About Boundary Systems itself is, of course, a PTC partner with over 20 years of experience in the PTC channel. Technical specialists range anywhere from 10 to 20 years of experience in the software, in different areas of the software as well. Some of our major accreditations are, of course, a PTC software reseller, PTC certified service provider. Of course, we're a training partner, authorized training centers that we have across the country, maintenance partner, and of course Windchill certified implementer. And we basically are supporting over 100 Windchill locations in North America as well. What you're seeing on the right side of this slide are just some of the companies that we currently work with. Once again, not an exhaustive list of everybody, but just a few of those that we actually work with. Now, as Boundary Systems, we have an overall mission. The overall mission statement for that is, first, to have the most technical expertise in PTC products of any company in the world. We have that by diversifying our technical team. We have a lot of technical specialists, and each one has our subject matter experts in different areas. So we don't claim to know everything individually, but as a group, we basically consider ourselves a very highly technical team in many aspects of the Creo and Windchill environment. Of course, we also want to go in and understand the needs of our customers. That's very important because we want to be able to give them the proper application for the software. For example, being product lifecycle management, making sure that the tools that we're recommending and the way that we're recommending doing it is appropriate. Also with that, to have a high level expertise and level understanding of what you need. With that, we guarantee the success of every solution that we provide. So we're not just going to go through and give you a solution just to kind of go in and pad our pockets. We want to make sure that what we go through and give you, you will implement, you will use, and it will, the last part of it, decrease costs, increase time to market, and increase the quality of your products. So we once again want to give you the information that you need to help your company improve overall. So once again, our goal is to make you better. By making you better, it makes us better as well. And that's once again where all these things fall into play. And once again, some of the solutions that we offer, of course, we offer a full suite of PTC solutions. We also deal with solid thinking, Modex 3D, Xformation, eTraj, ITI is one of our partner companies, ZW CAD for 2D CAD, Keyshot, Noesis, as well as Mentor Graphics. If you actually go to our website, you can actually get more information about all these different companies and the things that we actually work with them on as well. Or once again, you can always email us and we can get you information on those as well. Just general information for myself, once again, Michael Wimberly. My phone number is 513-415-0747, and of course my email address is mwimberly@boundarysys.com. If you have any direct sales questions, you can go in and contact our sales team at 440-274-0291 or send an email to sales@boundarysys.com. The other thing that I did fail to mention is two things. Some of you all who have been on the webinars before that know us, then you know that our headquarters is actually out of Cleveland, Ohio. That's where the 440 number comes in. But myself, I am actually out of Cincinnati, Ohio, and that's where the 513 area code comes in. So we have people stationed in Cleveland as well as other areas around the country as well. So we are, once again, diversified as far as our technical specialists and our locations that we are as well. But our headquarters is in Cleveland, Ohio. All right. So once again, the overall topics that we're going to cover is simply customizing the Creo interface. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the demonstration. And there's Creo. So I will be working inside of Creo 5. And one of the first things, of course, that we see when we start up Creo is we see these three windows pop up. So we have the Creo 5 that goes directly to PTC's website. You see the part community, and then you see the 3D mode space that comes up as well. Sometimes, depending upon your internet connection, that could slow down the process of going in and actually starting up Creo, because once again it has to go out to the internet and actually find each one of those pages. So one of the things that we can do right up front is to simply go through and remove those and have our home page actually go to a local site, or basically a local folder on our hard drive. So that's going to be one of the first things that I do. And what you'll see is throughout this presentation, I will be starting and stopping Creo several times where you can see the information locked in. So I'm going to go ahead into my configuration file that's underneath the file options. We'll go through the different areas inside of here as well. But first thing, I'm going to go down to the configuration editor, and right now is going in and showing the path of the current file that it's reading. So even before I do my configuration, one of the things that we can see, because one of the questions is always asked, is where are the files actually being read from? So one of the first things that we can see is if we go up to File, Help, and we go to System Information, inside this dialog box, it will go through and show us basically the information about our Creo session. So we can see first off, of course, our general information as far as company, where our license server is. So if you ever want to know where your actual license is coming from, that's what this 7788 is. It actually ties to the actual computer name that the licenses are associated with. It shows you all the licenses, extensions that you have, and then of course the actual direct machine information. And then down here is the installation directory of everything. So this is where the software is installed. This is actually where my startup directory is, and this is the actual startup command, which goes, of course, to the bin directory. Now, this is the area that's important, is the actual configuration files that are read. So there's a current session pro, which is just simply the current session of your information. You have your config.pro, you have your menu.def pro, and then you have your customization inside of here. So all of those, the menu.def pro and your config.pro, are in the common files text directory, and then the actual Pro-E user interface customization is actually in this path here. So it actually goes into U, Documents, Windchill Cache, so on and so forth. So all that is actually the location of that information for there. So once again, we can always go into here and see exactly which files are being read into our actual Creo session. So once again, I'm going to go in and go into my options, go to configuration, and then I'm going to go through and set a couple of configuration settings. So I'm going to go in here and do a find. And what I'm going to look up is an option that has enable. So I'm just going to search for the keyword enable. And when you see that, or when you search for that, you'll see several items come up. So one of them is this enable 3D model space browser tab. The default of that is set to yes. I'm going to go ahead and change that to no, and I'm going to go ahead and add that. There's also another one for enable the part community tab. So that's dealing with those two tabs there. And once again, the default of that is yes. I'm going to set that to no and add that as well. There's one other thing that I can do inside of here is actually set up my browser homepage. So I'm going to go in and type in browser. So you don't have to know all of the information. You simply have to know one of the words. And the word doesn't even have to be in the name of the configuration. It can actually search in the description as well. So although it may not be part of the name, it may be in the description, just search for that particular keyword. And if I go in and now say search description as well, you'll see that it'll give me more options because browser is in more of the actual descriptions than the actual the commands themselves. So I'm going to turn that back off, go back to find now. And what I'm looking for here is now my browser home page. So once again, instead of going to an actual HTML site, I'm going to go through and basically find a directory on my hard drive, and I'm just going to copy and paste that into this location. So what I wanted to do is simply go to a directory on my hard drive, add change. Now I'll go ahead and close this out. Now the third option that actually took me some time to go in and find is not actually something you can search for. So the last one that actually comes up is this PTC page here. So currently, just by setting my my new home page, it doesn't actually go through and remove that tab. It will remove these other two, but it doesn't remove that third one. That third one is actually a different command as well. So what I'm going to do is simply go in and select add. And for this one, it is enable underscore resource underscore browser underscore tab. Now with that one, I'm going to go through and set that basically to no. Now once again, if you notice, it doesn't actually show that in our regular setting. This is actually one of those hidden configuration options that doesn't show up in the search, but it is available to go in and use. So I now have gone through and set those three options and have changed my current browser location. So I'm going to go ahead and select OK. When I select OK, it now comes in and gives me the option of going in and saving those. So I do want to save these because I want this to continue to be set whenever I go through and open up Creo. So I'm going to go and select yes. Now currently it's going in and saving it to my working directory and it's saving it as a config.profile. I actually want this to be locked in and not to be overridden by any other settings. So I'm actually going to change this so it actually saves it to a config.sup file. Now, with the config.sup file, it actually goes through and the settings inside of there cannot be overridden by any config.profile. So whatever set inside of there is not overridable. You can change it per a session, but you cannot change it as a default setting inside of Creo. So I have saved that as a config.sup file, and currently that is located here. Now for this, I don't want this in this directory. I actually want to go through and save it to my installation directory. So I'm going to actually go in and take this file and I'm going to basically, I'm going to cut and I'm going to paste that into the same directory as my config.profile, which is under the program installation directory, common files text. And because this is a administrative directory, you will need to have administrative privileges to copy it to that particular directory. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to continue to go through and now copy that config.sup file to that location. And then once again, just so we can go through and verify what is in there, I will go through and open it up and I can see those four settings inside of there. Now, once again, to verify that they have been set properly, I will go through and exit out of Creo and then start Creo back up. And if all goes well, we should only see one tab show up and it should go to my local directory. And now as you can see, there it is. So we no longer have those other three tabs that actually search the internet. It actually just goes directly to my PTCU directory, which is the directory I told it as my home page. So once again, you can see it does reduce the amount of time that it takes to go through and pull up your different options. Now, let's go back into our config file again. So I'll go into File, Options, and inside of your config file, now you can see that you do have a config.profile. You also go in and see your config.sup file. So it does show the files that are currently being read inside of your Creo session. So when I go to my config.sup, it will go in and simply show those files that are actually in that specific config.profile. If I want to see all the options that are in my current session, I can go in and do that as well. Now, the other thing that I can do, or one of the things that you can notice real quickly inside of here, is that when we're looking, you can see the options that are set by our config.sup file because it shows a lock next to those, which is telling me I cannot override those specific files or those specific configuration settings. So those are locked in to from our config.sup file. So that is also another way visually to see what's controlled by the SUP file, or once again, what's driven by a config.profile. One of the other things that you can do is you can also go through and show the option of the source, which is simply going in and showing you the path to the actual configuration file that is driving those particular options. So you can see if you are reading multiple config.profiles in, you can see which options are coming from which config.pro session. Or I'm sorry, which config.pro file. All right, so I'll go ahead and remove that. And once again, I can leave it at current session. Now, once again, some of the options that you can go through and set inside of your config.profile is, of course, the display of items when you open them up directly inside of Creo. As far as the display, whether or not it's wireframe, hidden line, no hidden line, whether or not your datum planes are displayed, things like that you can go through and set as well. I always go through and set those, and I do a find on that, and then I go through and set display or search for display, and it goes through and of course finds the different items that we can manipulate for the display. There you can see that the default is set to shade. If that's the default that I want, great, I can leave that there. The display of the axes, right now I set that to yes. I'm going to set that to no. Add change. It also has the axes tags. So if the axes are turned on, do I want to see the actual tags for them as well? I'll just continue coordinate system display, set that to no. Come down here to display planes, and I'll once again set that to no. Add change, and then display points. Once again, set that to no as well. And once again, there's tons of options that are available. We can go through and use the search tab to go through and find each one of those. And then once again, you can see that these are new items that are currently set. Same thing here. When I select OK, it verifies that I want to save it. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And I am going to save that to my working directory into my local config.profile. And now I will have a config.profile that is also being read inside of there from my local directory. So all those things will be set in that local config.profile. All right. And then, so when I do go in and open up a file, I'm just going to open up just some general information. Let's just find something really quick. We can see once again by default all of my datums and everything are turned off. So we have that set inside of there that can be turned on and turned off. So that's just the default setting that we will go through and set for our particular model. I apologize for not having an actual model to use, but any model will do. All right, so let's go back to our file, go into options again, and then inside of here, just real briefly. So we have this favorites tab. Not a lot of people use this favorites tab. What the favorites are actually for are for configuration settings that we basically want to go through and change often depending on what we're looking at. So it could be something like a tolerance standard. It could be not a home page, but the date format or something else. So let's just go in and use tolerance standard. What I can go through and do is, depending on the model that I'm using, I may want to switch that from basically being ANSI to ISO. So I can go through and select that and say add that to favorites. What that does is now when I go to my favorites, it's listed there. So if there are settings that we want to change depending on what we're looking at, instead of having to go through, and I know that some people actually have multiple config files that they go through and load. So instead of going in and having a second config file, we can come over here and just simply add the items that we want to tweak from time to time, to actually go through and turn those things on and off, once again, just by simply having them in our favorites list. So what it simply is are all the configuration options that we want to go through and set, and maybe once again toggling on and off or switching the setting of those periodically, even throughout the session of our Creo model, or Creo session, I should say. Something like even that with our template start part. Where's our start part coming from? So we can go through, depending on what we're working on, change what the start part is actually looking at. So that's something else we can go through and tweak. So let's go ahead and continue on, because there's quite a bit of information inside of here that we can go through and use. The environment variables. So just simply our environment settings that we will go through and set on this. Once again, this is our current working directory. We can always change that in our session. It's equivalent of going in the same change working directory. If we want to go to our map keys, we'll get into that in just a moment, how we can go through and configure those as well. If you're using model check, you can go in and use that. And then if you're using design exploration, we can go through and specify the information associated with that as well. One of the other areas that we can go through and tweak is, of course, our actual display inside of Creo. So for those that have been on Creo/Pro-E for quite some time, I always can tell when I'm looking at somebody's session, because they immediately go through and change to maybe like a darker background. So there are some default themes that are inside of here. You have the default theme that is there. You have a light theme, which will go through and lighten up everything. And then of course you have the dark theme, which will now give us the dark toolbar. It'll give us basically a dark background that we can go through and see our files as well. We can also go through and simply change the interface. So maybe we do want we want to change the interface back to light and leave the background as dark. We can go through and once again change if necessary. We can do black on white. We can do white on black if we are doing exports. So we can go through and change everything to be a white background and have everything being black on the screen. That actually works out really well, of course, when you're dealing with drawings. And then, of course, you can go through and do a custom display as well. Any of those things that we can go through and set. So we can always go back to our default themes, or once again, dark, and then manipulate from there. So keep our background as dark as we want to. And then down here we have our graphics colors. So you have the geometry, hidden lines, the sketchers, so on and so forth. And there is the actual background color itself. So yes, it goes and it shows a dark background, but that's not specifically the color that we want. So we can go through and still manipulate what the background color is going to be for our session. So we can still go through and manipulate each one of those. You can also go in and manipulate when you're doing shade with edges, what the edge colors are going to be as well. One of the things that a lot of people do change as well, and I'm going to come over and just kind of bring this up, is our datum plane display. Because once again, if we are using our default theme, sometimes we want some of those things to go through and pop for us. So we can go over here and change our datum displays. So you have positive side and negative side. Some people may want to go through and change our positive side, to a brighter color, and our negative side to being, a lighter color, whatever it may be. That way when we're looking at them, you can see drastically the difference between the colors of our datum planes. So we can always go through and set those colors up as well, just so they pop a little bit more on the screen when we are using them. All right. And then, of course, we have our geometry information that we can go through and change as far as the default colors that we can go through and use. You also, of course, have Sketcher, so you have the colors inside of there. One of the things that some people do like to change, and it is a little bit better in 5 than it was in the previous ones, is simply the difference between our strong and our weak dimensions. When you're looking at them on the screen, to be able to distinctly see the difference between a strong and a weak dimensions. In the past, some of those colors have been pretty close, but if we do want to go through and change those, we have the ability to go through and set those as well, so we can drastically see. So it's not blue and then some other color of blue. It may be blue and then yellow for weak dimensions. So you can go through and set those up as well. And then they just have simple search information as far as highlights, and then of course show differences when you're doing your differences reports. Then you have ECAD and simulation colors that you can set as well. Model display. This is actually pretty nice as well. A couple of things that we can do is in this area here, or at the very top, trimetric versus isometric as far as the display setting of the default view. One of the things also that's pretty nice is when we're looking at our model and we're spinning our model around, one of the things that helps us sometimes orient our model properly is when we're actually looking at the datum planes. Sometimes when we have things in wireframe, it's kind of hard to distinguish because all of a sudden it'll flip the direction on us. But our datum planes kind of help us orient as well. So what we're able to do inside of here is basically model display settings while we orient in the model is simply tell it to show the datum planes, which means as I'm spinning the model, as I'm spinning the model, the datum planes themselves remain on the screen. So it kind of helps with the orientation of that particular model as well. So while I'm spinning it, I can leave my datum planes on, which once again will help me to accent whether I'm looking at the top side or the bottom side of the datum plane because of the colors of the datum planes. So that will also help in our rotation of that as well. Now, before I show the other option, I'm going to say yes for all the settings that I've done and save those to the local config.profile. I want to come over and add another extrude onto this surface here, just so I can show one other option. Inside of here. So once again, I'll go back to my options, go back to my model display. One of the other things that also helps us out is when you're spinning the model, if you look at that cylindrical feature that I just created, when I go in and rotate it, the edges of that cylindrical feature leaves. So the silhouette edges disappear. There is the option up here as well as show silhouette edges. Select apply on that. So now when I'm rotating, I still see the entire cylinder and I'm not just seeing the top and the bottom edges of that cylinder. I'm actually seeing the entire cylinder as I'm rotating it. So it also goes in and helps me once again better orient my model because the geometry of my model does not disappear as I'm going in and manipulating the display. All right, and then of course you have, after that, you have some additional items that can also be set up as far as shading model display, as far as the quality of the shade. We actually just had a customer that we worked with a moment ago, actually last week, that had rough edges when they were doing close-ups on their shading. What ended up happening was be able to go through and change the shade quality so those jagged edges actually by going and increasing that value became smoother. So it helped them when they were doing prints or export images to go in and show more smooth edges versus actual jagged edges. You know how it goes through and kind of makes it step when we're looking at circular surfaces. So that helped them out as well. Come down here to entity display, and this is just once again the default settings. This once again directly corresponds to the settings here, and by setting these are now setting the default options as well. So I can go through and change those, and when I come over and select apply and close it, it will now apply my default setting to always show the axes. So instead of searching for those options, I can do it right here inside of the actual dialog box here. So I have those options here, also showing tolerances. I can go through and set that up here as well. These will propagate to options inside of the config section. Selections. This is actually pretty nice as well. Now, these selection actually goes with the filter down here at the bottom of the screen. So by default, everything is set to, of course, the geometry and then all the options underneath there. What we're able to do is go in and specify our own type of selections that we want to go through and use that are different than what's down here. So for example, I want to go through and always be able to select an intent edge versus a simple edge. I also want to be able to go through and select an intent surface as necessary as well, intent datum curves, because I want to be able to go through and have more robust settings when I'm going through and selecting on my models. So I'm going to go through and set that up. Now, one of the other things that I can do is when I go through and set that, this by default would simply be another option inside of here. I can go through and set that where my default filter is the actual default one. So my filter becomes now the default selection. So I'm going to go ahead and select OK on that. And yes, once again, to go through and incorporate any changes that I've made to my config.profile. Now you can see down here at the bottom, this is set to my filter. So now when I come down here and I select, it's going into selecting intent surfaces. It's coming over and selecting intent edges by default. So it's not selecting individual edges, it's selecting what it considers an intent edge on that particular piece of geometry. So that is the default selection. And then of course I can come back over here to the geometry and now select the individual surfaces or individual edges as before. Now of course I can always still get to the intent by simply right clicking over each one of them and go into there, but I can go through and actually have my filter set where it goes in and selects the intent edges and surfaces by default. All right, so let's go back once again to my options, go to selection, and I'm going to go ahead and deselect that as a default option. Sketcher. Inside of here, of course, of our sketcher information, so we can go through and manipulate inside of here. These are all the default constraints that it's using when we actually go into Sketcher. If there's something that we don't want it to assume as we're sketching, we can deselect those from here. So that once again, as we're going into sketching, these will be items that are not by default being assumed as we're sketching. So we can always go in and turn those things off inside of here. And of course, the same thing with our sketcher display settings, whether it's showing vertices, constraints, dimensions, weak dimensions, all those things as far as what's being displayed on the screen. And then of course, a number of decimal places that we can go through and set as well. And then these are the options that I've actually had several people ask me about is whenever, and a lot of us have run into it, whenever you go in and modify a dimension inside of Sketcher and you begin to drag, your modified dimension automatically changes because it's going in and moving with the geometry. Well, we can go through and actually lock those. So we can go through and lock these settings. So anytime we modify a dimension, it automatically becomes a locked dimension. Or basically lock user defined dimensions, which means anytime we create a dimension, that dimension immediately becomes locked. So anytime we go through and modify dimensions or create our own dimensions, those dimensions now become locked dimensions, which means the dragging of our geometry will not go through and affect those dimensional values. We can just simply go through and double click those to modify them at that point. They won't actually be shown. Won't actually be modified by going in and selecting. This is also the grid. A lot of people don't necessarily go through and turn on the grid inside of Sketcher, but you can go through and show it. And not only show it, you can also snap to it. So the grid squares can actually be vertices that you can snap through as you're going through and select, manipulating the grid. Assembly options, once again, just the information that you want to go through and manipulate for references as far as backup, as far as when you're going in and referencing things from different sub-assemblies inside of there, retrieval information, so on and so forth. Auto placement, so when you are going in and doing an auto place, when you have component interfaces, it's basically going in and specifying the number of positions that it will go through and use. Notification center, this is actually important as well, because down here at the bottom, when you have those little flags that come up, or depending on what version of Creo you're in, you may still have the stoplight. This goes in and dictates what's a warning and what's an actual error. So once again, circular references show up as a warning message. We can go through and set that to not to show. It's simply a warning or it is an error. Now these things not only correspond with just simply notifications here, but it also is something that can be used in conjunction with model check, that can be used in conjunction with wind chill. So you can use model check that will go through and set it up so that any of your models that have an error is not allowed to be checked inside of wind chill. So if we want to go through and make sure that we only have warning messages, or if warning messages come up, you can have it where it doesn't go through and allow it to go into wind chill. So you have the ability to go through and set those up, or things that you just don't want to see, you can go through and basically tell it not to show. So those things can also be set up inside of here. And as you can see, some things can't be changed, like this is invalid validation feature, of course. That is an error. There's nothing you can do about that. So those things can be set inside of here as well. All right, and then you have ECAD information dealing with boards. Same thing with ECAD. Data exchange. You also have sheet metal, where we can go through and specify the default bend allowance tables, the sheet metal preference locations, flange tool shape locations for those sections, punch model locations. So if you have a bunch of punches and dies, you can go through and set where that standard library is, so that everybody now has access to that same information. Update control, and then of course additive manufacturing information. All right, I'll come back to customizing as far as the actual ribbons themselves in just a moment. We also have the window settings. The window settings deals with the navigation tab, where it's located, left or the right. Once again, the width of it, how wide do we want that to be, model tree settings, browser settings, clearing the history of the browser, the graphics toolbar. So this toolbar, where do we want that located? It can be customized here on the screen, or once again here inside of the dialog box, customized dialog box, and then once again just different dialog boxes that pop up, such as suppress and resume dialog boxes. All right, so now let's come up here to the customized area for the ribbon. So with the ribbon itself, you have the ribbon that you can go through and manipulate. Right now I'm inside of a part. So it's actually going to go through and show me the information for all the part commands. So I can go in and see all the options that are available. Here are the actual tabs that are available that we see here on the side. If there is a tab that we don't use, so for example, we're not using flexible modeling, I can just simply deselect that, and that tab does not show up on the screen. So if that's something you're not using, although you may have the license for it, it's not something that you use, you can always deselect that, so it's not actually being shown on the display. All right, and then inside of here we can see, of course, all the different options inside of here. So in the options, we can see everything that is located here. We can see that we have the generate icon that's set up, and then underneath there you have the other options that are underneath regenerate. Copy, the paste special, of course, will be underneath there. And so each one of these groups is now underneath the model tab. And then so on and so forth. As we go to the analysis tab, we can go into there. Now, as I was mentioning here on the left side, it shows all commands associated with the part. That can actually be filtered, where I can go through and just show based on the information that I want to see. So if I know that I want to go simply and see the information in the model tab, then it'll just show me the tabs or the information associated with the model tab. It's not showing me any of the other information at that point in time. So if I want to add additional information, I can go through and now add that additional information. Same thing down here with any of the other tabs that I want to go through and use. All right, the next one is also the quick access toolbar. The quick access toolbar is this one here at the top. That is fully customizable as well. One of the things that you can go in and do, of course, is move that quick access toolbar from being at the top above the ribbon to actually below the ribbon. So we'll actually just display here in the ribbon, and of course we can go through and add any information that we want inside of there as well. Once again, from any of the tabs that we want to go through and use, we can go through and look at all the commands and simply go through and specify what we want to go through and add to that quick access toolbar. All right, and then inside of there as well, we have the shortcut menu. Now, the shortcut menu is a new menu that is now available inside of 4. That menu actually comes up when you actually select on a feature. It comes up, basically we call it the mini toolbar. It actually pops up anytime you select a feature, and it has information inside of there as well for you to go through and create information. And I'll actually show you that in just a moment. But that is once again customizable as well, so we can go through and add any additional commands that we want to inside of any of these options as well. And then of course you have the shortcut keys. Shortcut keys, those are your map keys. So inside of here you have all the different shortcuts. Now inside of Creo, there are some default shortcuts. So I'm going to go through and sort by the shortcut and you can see that there are some default ones in there. So for shading with reflections, it's Control 1, shade with edges, Control 2, Control 3, so on and so forth, all the way down to 6. Control A is activate, Control C, of course, is copy, default view, edit definition, so on and so forth. So these are all the default settings that are inside of the software. So you don't have to go through and do anything special. These are already there. So you can use these out of the box. As you can see, there's quite a few of them in there already. There's also some, and once again, it's kind of odd to me that this is actually a single letter. So for planes, to actually create a datum plane, it's just P. To create a round, it's R. To create sketch, it's the S. And of course, if you've been on Creo or Pro E for a while, we know that anytime we've created map keys, we usually use multiple keys to go through and do that. Now, if we do want at point go through and change any of those, we simply select on that. So now instead of that being just a P, I can also have it basically P, I can actually be PL. Cancel. It's not doing, it went away. Now it's being difficult. So it's not using my keys. I was doing it just a moment ago. I'm not sure what's going on there. But it's normally just selecting the keys will go through and allow you to go through and redefine that. And I'm missing something and I can't think of what it is to go through and manipulate that. But we can go through and change any of those or add any additional ones to any of the sections that we're in. So we can go through, and all you're doing at that point is going in and selecting the actual keyboard strokes to go through and display those. So let's go in here and let's look at why is it not using an additional command? I'm confused now as to why it's not using my two keys. I'll have to double check that. Not sure what's going on there. But as you can see, whatever keyboard stroke you hit is going to go through and use those. So I was using the control key and it actually went in and basically used control to go through and activate it or to go through and set the command. So like I said, I have to double check that. I'm not sure what's going on with that one. But you can go through and create those. These are all the areas. Of course, you can see all the commands we can go through and create shortcuts for inside of our session of Creo. So it's quite a few things that we can go through and set inside of there. All right, and then we'll go ahead once again, select OK. And now we can go through and set that up. Now, there is one thing that I did want to show before I conclude, is that when we do go to the ribbon, there is, and people have been asking about this, there is an option for a global tab. So currently it is based on, my tabs currently are based on the mode that I'm in. There is an option for a global tab, which means it will show in all the modules or modes that we go through and actually select. And I'm just going to go through and add a couple of commands underneath there. That way we can see them. Some will be specific to part mode, and we'll see how those actually behave when we actually go through and go into different modules. So let's go ahead. I'm going to add draft. And then I'll just go ahead and say OK. Now that common tab will always be at the back, so it'll always be the last tab. So now when I come over here and I create a new assembly, that common tab is still there. So it will go through and still show that information on the screen. And then once again, it's grayed out depending on what we're working on. When I go through and select that, you can see that now my delete is available to go in and delete that particular feature. But of course, draft won't be available. And because I'm in a simple window, there's nothing to go through and activate because I'm not inside of a subpart. So you do have the ability, once again, to go through and now create a common tab that will propagate across all modes of Creo. So you can go through and set those up. And one of the things that you can do in that common tab is inside of here, we can go through and rename this, and this one can be for parts. So I can put in the commands that I want specifically for parts. I can now go through and create a new group underneath there, rename this one to assembly, and then so I can go through and basically put all the commands that I want specifically for assemblies. And then of course I can do the same thing for drawing mode. And now I can still go through and use that common tab and go in and now use things specific to the areas that I'm working inside of. So at this point, once again, I am in the assembly. I can go through the different areas inside the assembly just like I can normally. I'll go to my assembly tab, and now the things that I use on a normal basis, on a regular basis, I can go through and now add those inside of here. So I can go through and add a symbol because that's something that we use on a normal basis. I can go in and do a bill of material report because that's something I use on a normal basis, so on and so forth, to go through and manipulate those different things. So it doesn't matter where it's located in the different tab areas. I can go through and actually simply add that into my common folder. And then once again, when I go back to my part and I go to the common area, you can see all the things for the assembly are grayed out because once again, they're not relevant to the actual part mode. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of customization that can be done inside of Creo session. Once again, simply right-clicking on the graphics toolbar, you can go through and add and remove information inside of here. We can go in and manipulate the location of that graphics toolbar as well as the size of it. I always make mine small. Large. The default of that is small. I like to be able to see it so I can work with it. So I do make it large. That way I can go in and manipulate it. If it is in the graphics area, you don't want to see it, I can go through and now change its location to now be in the status bar so it shows up in the bottom of my window. So I can go through and use that there as well. Same thing here. I can right click inside of the ribbon area and simply say customize the ribbon, customize the quick access toolbar, show quick access toolbar above the ribbon so I can put it back to where it was. And then the same thing inside of here, as I mentioned before. When I go through and I'm going to go back to just geometry, when I select on that, there's a mini toolbar. I can go through and now customize this as well. So I'm just right clicking on that, select customize, and now I'm able to go through and once again add additional commands inside of this as well. Now, if you're not familiar with it, one of the benefits of this, of having this, is because now you have the actual full screen mode inside of Creo that you can go through and use. And that full screen mode is F11. So the benefit of that is having the commands that I use on a regular basis in this pop-up menu or the mini toolbar that comes up versus having to go to the ribbon to go through and find the commands. So that way, once again, I'm still working within the full screen mode. And once I go through and select on an item, I can go in and say extrude. And I'm once again right inside of Sketcher. All the options inside of Sketcher that I want to go through and use, or once again customize that as well to now go through and add additional commands inside of my Sketcher pop-up menu. So these are fully customizable so that once again I can spend less time up here in the menus and more time on the screen. And if I want The model tree, I just simply go over to the left side, expand the model tree, manipulate that as well. So all those things are available to me inside of the actual menu. So I can go through and do that. Once again, that's F11 to go through and manipulate that. And then the last thing I am going to show is in the model tree. Model tree can be customized. So we can go through, basically add additional columns. You can add your attributes as necessary. You can add attributes, feature names down here, our model parameters. This works out really well when you're inside of an assembly, because that way, if it is an item that you want to go through and manipulate, it can be manipulated directly inside of the model tree. So I can go in and actually give this or fill in that value directly inside the model tree, and it does fill in the parameter. Now, a lot of people don't go through and create model tree configurations because, once again, it takes up space. But what you're able to do inside of the model tree is actually be able to toggle the display information on or off. So it doesn't always have to stay on. So I can go through and customize this, save this setting out to a tree configuration file, go to my working directory, and then I can also go into my config.profile and find tree, and then go in and point to that model tree configuration file, so it always reads that in every time I start Creo. And then yes, to go through and save that to my local config.profile. So now that will always be read in to my model tree or to my Creo session. And then once again, when I don't want to see the information, I can just toggle it on and off as so. And I can use the scroll bars as necessary or expand the window as needed. So we can go in and customize there as well. All right, so that's a lot of information. As far as customization, there's still, of course, a few things that we can still go through and tweak inside of there. I didn't go through everything, all the options that are available inside of here, but depending on what you want to go through and work in, you can go through and manipulate from here as well. All right, so at this point, that concludes the demonstration. And if there are any questions, I will take them now. Inside of your webinar, there is an area in there that you can go through and ask questions. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and type them in there. And we will go through and see those. The question is, what about the .ui files? Does Creo read the one in the working directory or the one from the cache? It uses the one in the cache by default. I have not written one to my local directory, but I think it should read that one as well and basically combine, just like it kind of does with the config file. The next one, does saving the config.profile result in gross duplication of entries like past releases? No. So when you go in and save your config.pro, now you do want to be careful with that. And when I say be careful, just be mindful of where they're coming from. So that's one of the benefits of, excuse me, let me go back, open up Creo again. That's one of the benefits in Creo by going in and looking at your config file. You can see exactly where it's reading the config.profiles from. So not only here, but once again, the other thing we can also go in and see is, of course, where it's located. Oops, sorry, that was wrong. Current session. Did I set that wrong? Yep, I did. Nope, not favorites. I want that. So that's where the benefit of that comes in, is we can go in and see which config files are being read from where and what options are inside of each one. So my thing is just simply be mindful. The two places that I go through and write config files to are the actual the common folders, the text directory, And once again, that is your config.pro and your config.sup. Now, I will set settings inside, of course, the SUP file that I don't want to be overridden, and the config.pro file that I want to be set generically. Now, also remember that it's also going to go through and read a config.pro file from your local directory. So we'll also go through and read one from your local session as well. Now, one of the things that I've also worked with another customer on is that that local directory that is actually going to go through and use is based on this path. So it's going to read another config file from the start-in directory. So one of the things that we've done in the past is when we work with multiple customers, inside of that startup directory is where I will go through and have the customer specific information. So I'll have multiple startup icons, but each startup icon points to a different start-in directory, which has a different set of configuration options. The things that are for me that I want common across the board, I'll set in that text directory in the installation directory. But customer specific stuff, I will set in this directory. That way, once again, it reads specifically what the customer wants, not based on what the preferences that I have set up. So those are really the two main areas that I set my configuration settings for, is in the installation directory and whatever my start-in directory is. So, and as you saw, every time that I've gone through and changed the config.profile or just change an option, it asks me to basically go through and resave it. And what it's simply doing is going in and now updating this same config.profile with those additional options that I've gone through and set up. So you can see that the last thing I set up was a model tree, and that's inside of here now. All right. And the question is there a list of hidden config options? There is somewhere. I don't know exactly where they are. I would have to go through and find that, and maybe we'll put that in the notes for when this gets posted to the our YouTube channel. I'll have that in the notes as far as where you can go through and find some of the hidden configuration options. Because yes, there are a list of them. I don't know if it's an exhaustive list of all the hidden options, but there are quite a few of them that will be listed, and some of them update based on the versions of the Creo that you're using as well. So that will update as well. All right. Those are the three questions at this point. If there are any additional questions, please, once again, feel free to go through and type them in. All right. So before we completely get off or end this webinar, I do want to go through and bring your attention that we do have additional webinars coming up. To go through and find them, you can go to our website, boundarysys.com. and actually go to the webinars page. It will go through and show you the upcoming webinars. You can also go to our training page and actually see that as well. So when I go to our actual web page, you can see our upcoming webinars. Just go to the webinar section. It shows all the webinars that are coming up. You can also go to our training. You can actually see our training locations as to where we do training, where we have training centers at. You can see there's quite a few. And then you can also go in and see our training schedule. And you can also see in our training schedule that it will go through and show you what the courses are, when they're being held, the number of days, and the cost of them. And you can see whether or not they're guaranteed to run. We do have a couple of intro classes that are guaranteed to run coming up. Looks like that one's already ran. That one's coming up. There's one here on the 15th. That's also coming up. I'm sorry, that's on the 11th, which is Monday. So you better get on that one if you want to get in there. But you can see all the information inside of there. And of course, just the overall course offerings as far as the list of the classes that are available. So that's there. And then once again, for information, you can go through and contact myself. at Michael Wimberly, 513-415-0747, as well as mwimberly at boundarysys.com. And that also answers the other question, is where can you suggest topics for webinar? You can always email me directly, or you can email sales at sales@boundarysys.com, and we'll go in and get those, take those into consideration for upcoming webinars as well. We also have a support system that we can go through and use. So our current customers can use support.boundarysys.com, go in and log a support ticket with us. You can also go in and email support at support@boundarysys.com to go through and contact us as well. That now concludes our webinar. And once again, I thank you for your time, and I hope that this was informative for you, and that you'll be on some of our webinars coming up. So once again, thank you for your time, and enjoy the remainder of your day. Thank you.